Are you here? It's the Paul Leslie Hour with our guest, Jeremy Carl, author of The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. Jeremy Carl is also a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute and was formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior. Smart guy? Indeed. It's all happening right here on episode number 1069 of the Paul Leslie Hour. Please share this interview and by all means tell someone who you think would be receptive. Let's begin.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome author Jeremy Carl. He is the author of The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. He's a very gifted public speaker. You may have heard him on shows such as the Tucker Carlson podcast, as well as the Victor Davis Hanson show. So it seems like you have written a book about the ultimate taboo in the American political conversation. Was there any trepidation on your part to write such a book?
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a lot, quite frankly. And in fact, had there not been, probably would have written the book years before. You know, I knew that in writing this sort of book, you were putting a big target on your back. But I ultimately decided that I was in a good position to write this book, not just because it was an issue that I thought and written a lot about before, but just because I was maybe a little less cancelable than some others. I'm a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute. My employers have been very supportive of my academic freedom. And so I felt it was a really important issue and that I should just take the risk in writing the book. And I was really fortunate in that, you know, I was talking with one of the really big political figure on the right. I won't out him here, but he just sort of wrote me out of nowhere like a week ago, like, wow, you know, your timing on this was really good. Like this could have been your career. You took a huge risk in writing it. And, you know, I was just fortunate, I think, between the timing and the fact that the book itself is frankly, if I, you know, can pat myself on the back, it's not a bad book and it's pretty carefully argued. And the combination of those two things meant that I was actually able to have quite a bit of success. And of course, you know, the people you would expect complained, but I had a tremendous amount of support, particularly from the right side of the political spectrum.
It is a timely book. And we had a submitted question. This comes from Robert McCready. I find that sometimes the most simple questions they're right under your nose. And I thought, wow, this is a great question. He asked, let's see here. Why do these people hate white people?
Yeah. You know, as far as I think there's a variety of reasons. I mean, in some cases you have a certain amount of jealousy or envy from various groups. And I want to say that carefully. I'm almost not even casting aspersions on that. Is if you are looking at a group that has, for whatever reason, been a pretty successful group in organizing society. I mean, whether you think that they got there by fair means or foul, I think inevitably, if you're in a group that has been historically more subordinate, whatever that group is, I think it's only almost a natural inclination to look at other groups and say, you know, you're only where you are because you're bad in some way. I'm very fortunate. I probably subscribe to most of the deadly sins with more eagerness than I would care to admit, but I'm not an envious person, and so this is not something I can personally identify with, but I've seen enough of it to know that does go on and that it's a real thing. At the same time, I think you have some people using it really, really cynically, right? Like they may not even believe it at all. And but they see that they can get a bunch of political power by kind of pushing on this. And anytime you're pitting one group against another group, you're going to do that. So I think that can kind of come into play. And then I think sometimes you also just have a situation in which, you know, people are responding to real historical injury, right? And, you know, you can certainly see that whites have not always, as a group, dealt perfectly with all other groups in society at all times in the past. Now, what I would say with the big caveat is when you actually do a cross-cultural and cross-national comparison, I'd put the way that whites and white Europeans have treated minority groups up against pretty much any group from history, or at least the vast majority of them. But even that having been said, there have clearly been instances of historical wrongs. And so people feel aggrieved maybe because of that for natural reasons. And so they're reacting to that. So I think it's different sorts of things that motivate different people. But I'd say that a lot of them would fall into one of those three buckets.
I'll admit to spending a little too much time on X every day. But something that anybody who, if you log on to X and you're reasonably looking at political content, you're going to see a tremendous amount of what I would call scapegoating of white people. Like, white people are responsible for this, they're responsible for that, for pretty much every societal issue there is. How has this scapegoating been a mechanism for gaining power politically?
Well, I think anytime in politics that you can rile up one group against another group, that's a way to get political power. And in fact, I was very cognizant in writing this book that was not my goal. My goal was not to say, oh, well, all these other non-white groups, or frankly, even liberal whites, who are kind of in many ways the most powerful vector for a lot of this. I'm not saying, oh, these people are all bad and we should be really angry at them. Yeah, again, I write in the book, and I've said in innumerable interviews I've done on the book, I'm not trying to create a new victim class here. We have enough victim politics and identity politics of that way. At the same time, I'm trying to talk about something that is very real, that is going on in society, and we can't not talk about a harmful phenomenon just because, oh, well, this might make somebody look like they're trying to play the victim. No, I'm just describing a bad thing, and I'm saying that we shouldn't put up as a society, and also particularly also speaking to other white people, you shouldn't put up with this type of behavior. And so, I'm kind of writing it from that perspective. But again, I think there's no grand mystery as to why people engage in this type of politics. It's been successful from time immemorial, and the groups change, but the dynamics usually don't.
What has happened to BLM? It seems like they've kind of just disappeared. I don't see much from them anymore at all.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things going on here, right? There was the formal Black Lives Matter organization, which was literally started by communist-trained lesbians, and for the most part, I'm not being kind of hyperbolic when I say that. Literally, that was kind of some of the main people, African American, obviously, as well, who started this organization that was the formal Black Lives Matter organization. Now, obviously, and credit to them for being good marketers of their thing. The actual movement itself took on a life infinitely beyond that group. Now, that particular group, you had all sorts of literally corruption. You had people buying, who were involved in the organization, expensive homes, with corporate and other donations to this. And so at some point, even for pretty shameless liberals to actually donate money to the Black Lives Matter organization as an organization became a little bit too embarrassing, because it was just so obviously a con through and through. But of course, it took on this life of its own, and lots of other organizations embraced that mantra. I think one of the things that happened is Donald Trump got elected. I think it was on the downhill even before then, but I think that was a real vote. It's a vote on many things, but one of them was on this type of anti-white identity politics. And the fact that Trump not only won, but he won with a kind of record ethnic diversity in terms of his supporters, it kind of laid to rest the sort of, it's kind of like, the white supremacist candidate who took the majority of Latino men, and the white supremacist candidate who took record numbers in decades of Asians, and the white supremacist candidate who took a record number of young African American men. It just, at a certain point, it just kind of became, in the wake of Trump's election, a ridiculous sort of charge that was even a little bit too shameful for the American left to sort of push. And so that's kind of, I think it was really sort of sticking the stake in the vampire's heart in this case.
What do you think we should make of that, this record election, in terms of minorities voting for somebody like Donald Trump, who is a Republican?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a few things, and I'm actually a little bit less sanguine, having said all that, than some people are. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, this is the start of the multiracial working class Republican." Look, that's great. I mean, I'm delighted that Donald Trump put together a much more multi-ethnic coalition, not just because as conservatives we need to reach out to every voter, but just because I think it's healthier. I mean, this is kind of in some ways what my book is about. Like it's healthier if we don't have such racialized dynamics in society, however that comes about. That having been said, I think there are some unique things about Donald Trump as a personality that made him particularly attractive to some of these groups in a way that is not easily replicable. I mean, this is not like a stunning political insight I'm giving, that Donald Trump is kind of a unique character in American politics. And so I'm not totally sure that we're going to be able to replicate his performance as easily. And I do worry that some of the many groups that were, for example, saying, and people like me were opposing them in the wake of Mitt Romney's 2012 defeat, oh, we just need to be super pro amnesty as a party to suck up to Hispanics, and that's how we'll get them. And people like me were saying, well, there are a million things that were wrong with it, but one is that nobody respects a coward. Nobody respects somebody who's not going to stand up for their own voters and their own people. And if you actually do that in an unapologetic way, but also invite other groups to kind of join with you as patriotic Americans, that's a much better way of going and doing things. Ultimately, that's what Donald Trump did. And he put up numbers among Hispanic voters, again, that were the highest in history for a Republican candidate. So I do think that we're going to have some challenges meeting those. And I don't want that to be used as an excuse to not go after white voters, because actually, if you really kind of break down the electorate, the shocking thing is, given that the Democratic Party is basically institutionally anti-white, they are still getting 42% of the white vote presidentially, and it's pretty shocking. So that's really hunting where the ducks are, is to kind of go after increasing our share of that vote. And I think we can do that in a way that in and of itself doesn't kind of threaten our continued growth among minority voters. And in fact, if we do it well, we can kind of really put ourselves as the not permanent, but at least for decades, majority party, sort of standard majority party, and let the Democrats be the party of kind of transgenderism and Black Lives Matter and all the craziness.
Well, how do we do that very thing? How do we definitely want to attract these people who are non-white voters.
Yeah.
How do we do it?
Yeah, well, so again, I mean, I think part of it, and this is what Trump is so good at naturally. I mean, it's just one of his great instincts that I think other candidates could mimic, although again, you're not going to be Trump, is he's so comfortable with who he is. And that's just a thing that our candidates could do. I mean, don't apologize in any way for being white. Don't apologize for America or its history. By the way, that doesn't mean when I'm saying, oh, we don't apologize for America or its history. We can be very proud of American history and still point out times that we fell short of our ideals without apology. I think there's nothing that is incongruous about doing that, but it's a question of sort of where the balance is, right? And I think when it's almost like romantic life, right? Like when you're confident in yourselves, people are more attracted to you. So I think in some ways it's just that simple. What we don't need is some sort of weird, 37-point plan for how we're going to recruit African Americans or Hispanics. We need to be the unashamed, pro-American, just pro-patriotism party. And that's going to attract a lot of people at the end of the day, because that's not what the Democrats are selling. And most people want to like their country. They want to like their history. And we just need to give them permission to do that by not apologizing for ourselves.
That's right. Well, as somebody who has delved into this subject to the level that you have, and also been around President Trump, how do you view that when somebody says, like, what's the rebuttal when somebody says, oh yeah, well, Donald Trump is a racist?
Well, I mean, I think you just look at the group of people the very diverse in every way set of people that he kind of hangs around socially, professionally, whatever. I mean, Donald Trump is an old school guy, right? Like he's kind of like one of those guys, back in the old days. Like, I mean, I remember he's of an earlier generation than me, but I'm 52. when I was a kid growing up, there'd be ethnic jokes going back and forth, among your friends who were, it could even be sort of sub-ethnics with whites, but minorities, and you guys would all make fun of each other, especially among guys, I think. And it was sort of all in good fun. And in many ways, it was kind of a way of bringing everybody together. I mean, it was almost a bonding ritual. And I think Trump sort of does that instinctively. And so I think, at the end of the day, Donald Trump likes patriotic people, and he likes people who like Donald Trump. And whether they are, it doesn't matter what skin color they are. It doesn't even matter where they're from. And I think it's hard to watch Donald Trump over the last decade plus that he's been, I mean, he's obviously been in public life for a long time, but that he's been kind of the center of our public and political life, and not pick that up. And even sometimes, I mean, he'll be talking about some illegal alien criminal in these very kind of vituperative terms, and it'll make the left go insane. But he's talking about how they victimize some minority person, and he doesn't draw attention to the fact that they're a minority, because it just, for him, it's like, here's Americans, that's all of us. And then, like, there's other guys who are not Americans, maybe, we don't like them quite as much, right? But I think that's sort of how he approaches things. And I think, again, broadly speaking, you're not going to recreate Trump, but this is a good way for a leader to act in most cases.
Since I heard your speech, I've seen a few things in the news, and I've thought, oh yeah. And I've thought back to things that you said. And just over the last few days, I've seen so many headlines kind of portraying DEI almost in past tense.
Yeah.
Or at least kind of writing about it in a way that almost has a negative slant to it.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen with DEI? Is it just going to get a new name?
Well, there's a lot of things. And I mean, again, if I can pat myself on the back slightly, I think this was one of the things that my book and some other folks did, was that we sort of helped change the conversation. I mean, friends of mine like Chris Rufo, I think have done an outstanding job on the DEI question in particular. I don't think that the left is just going to put the woke away. You've seen all sorts of cases in which DEI employees have just been relabeled into like corporate culture, and unless somebody challenges them, it's not going to go away. I also think, I mean, the left is expert at this. We've got them back on their heels. They're used to punching the right, and not ever getting a real effectual punch back. I'm not saying the normal Republicans haven't tried, but they just usually don't have any clue how to do that. So now they've gotten a punch back, and they're sort of staggered a little bit, but they're not on the canvas. They're going to figure out how to push back and to activate, ethno-political networks to kind of push on this, because ultimately DEI is a big gravy train for the left. So they're not just going to give it up completely. At the same time, even just by, whether it's through executive orders or other things, just introducing this as, hey, it's okay to challenge this. All of a sudden, what you've done is, look, I mean, there's some corporate true believers, there's some individual true believers, et cetera, in this issue. But there's also a lot of people, and this is a lesson of politics generally, who are just going along, right? And what we are doing is creating space for those guys who are just going along to say, actually, I don't like this. Or if it's a corporate person and they really don't want to, but they didn't feel like they had a choice, they can go to the CEO and say, hey, look, there's legal exposure under the Civil Rights Act and other things if we continue this type of discrimination. So, I think we should just get rid of it. So we've definitely opened it up as a contested space. I think it will be hard to imagine that, at least over the near term, barring a dramatic demographic change, that we're going to have DEI at the same level that we had it. At the same time, I don't think, unfortunately, that it's going to be going away. It's going to reappear under other guises.
Well, something I like about your speech, and even in this interview, is you pointed out a couple times now that, look, we should be standing up for things, especially when they're true, and we should be standing up against things when they're wrong. But also, we don't want to adopt some kind of a victim mentality like so much of the left does. How do we do that?
Well, one of the things I tried to do in my book is to sort of say, in many ways, it was like an exhortation to other white people that, like, hey, have enough self-respect that you're not allowing yourself to be treated in this way, right? It's almost an anti-victim ideology. And that doesn't mean that you need to be aggressive or hostile to any other group. It just means like if somebody's having racist policies against you, you should stand up and call it out, right? It's like it's sort of that simple. And then I think also the kind of so that's sort of the negative polarity element of it, if you want to call it that. And then the other element is just you have to stand for something. And again, I think this is something that Trump just does instinctually without even having to think about it, which is you have to sort of stand up for this pro-American vision, because you need to, if you're going to destroy a vision, you need to offer them some alternative. And by the way, the alternative can't just be I get to be the victim and get all the stuff now. I mean, that's not going to work for a variety of reasons. And it's, even if it did work, it wouldn't be a good thing. But if you sell them on like, hey, here's America, here's our history, here's our culture, again, a culture that was largely, not entirely, but largely created by whites of European descent. But you're here and you're part of the American family. We would love for you to join us, right? Like in that, and continue to make your contributions to that culture as we go into further into the 21st century and sort of make that invitation. So that's the kind of positive element of what you can do, which is to really kind of unite the country around a patriotic vision that everybody feels like they can share, and at the same time saying, hey, we're not going to erase our history. We're proud of our history.
Yeah. Well, in addition to this standing up that you talk about and being proud of our American history and uniting whenever we can, what do you think the everyday person, the everyday American can do about this issue? What practical things?
Well, I mean, I think you can get involved in your local politics. That's one of the easiest things. I mean, because a lot of this stuff, I mean, there's some of it happens at the national level, but so much of it is happening at the local level. It's sort of if you see something, say something, as they used to say on the subways, right? And in fact, I mean, I think one of the great powers of X, and I've even seen this myself. I mean, I've got 50,000 plus followers on X, so it's not zero, but I'm not like some gigantic account. But I've got enough that if I see an example of that in real life, or if somebody sends me one, and I'm real Jeremy Carl, people can send me DMs on X. I do read them, and they send me something shocking. I can post about it and it can get out there. So, for example, somebody recently, when Michigan had announced they were sort of killing their DEI stuff at their universities, and then a student at the University of Michigan Dearborn who wanted to be anonymous, sent me this email that they got from their administration, which very much suggested that, in fact, they weren't really killing DEI. And I posted this, and it got a lot of kind of national commentary to the point that they sort of went back and they actually killed it, right? So I think you have that ability. I mean, whether you've got a microphone yourself, metaphorically speaking, or whether you just know somebody, get information out to people. There's a lot of folks, including me, who love to, if there's really egregious examples of anti-white discrimination out there, we want to talk about it. But go to your town hall meetings, things like that. Those are all sorts of things that you can do to have an impact, I think.
Well, I'll echo one thing. You're going to want to follow at Real Jeremy Carl. It's a recommended follow on X. And also, it's jeremycarl.com. You can pick up his book. It's a recommended book. I've ordered my copy. It should be here any day now, I saw. So what's in the future with Jeremy Carl? Are you working on anything right now that you can tell us about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, there's some chance, without kind of previewing anything or making anything official, that I was in Trump 1.0. I served as a deputy assistant secretary in the Department of the Interior. I think there's some chance I may go into the second Trump administration. So that's we'll have to see. It may or may not work over the short term. I've got to make that. There's family decisions. I've got 5 kids, and they're not and a wife, and they're not moving anywhere, and we live in Montana. So those sorts of things have to be negotiated. But that's a possibility. And then in the meantime, I'm continuing to write a lot. And you can also go to, since you were mentioning some of the places you can find me, jeremycarl.substack.com. I have a Substack. And I also write for a bunch of conservative publications. You can sign up for my Substack. It's free. You can go on Amazon or anywhere else and order the book. And you can see it's gotten a ton of recommendations from really big names in the conservative movement, from Tucker and Trump Jr. to Victor Davis Hanson to, you kind of name it, including the longest serving member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So a kind of diverse group of recommenders. And then I'm working on a follow-up book right now, not on the exact same topic, but on a similar topic with a slightly different angle, which is I'm looking at liberal whites and why I think they are a particularly corrosive and toxic group in American society that's sort of uniquely damaging. So I'm sort of putting the liberal white under the microscope and kind of writing a book about that. And then having said that, I mean, I have lots of whites of various degrees of liberalism in my own life. I mean, I do want to actually stress one of the things I say right at the beginning of the introduction to this book that I'm working on is I'm not actually saying these are all horrible people, or even that every single thing they do is bad, but that in fact it's really just a focusing on the critique of their politics, which is really damaging, and it's, I think, damaging to themselves and damaging to others. So those are the sorts of things I am kind of have on the front burner right now. I'm enjoying it. There's still been, the book came out almost a year ago, but I've still continue to have a lot of interest in it. Was just spoken at Harvard and Notre Dame and Hillsdale just in the last couple months on the book. So I think it's a subject that's not going away. And Trump has made a lot of improvements, but this, we're going to be talking about this for a while.
Well, this book that you're working on, that sounds very intriguing. What would you say is the biggest way that white liberals in particular are corrosive?
Well, I think it's partially just a function of their power. And again, I mean, like this is a complicated argument I'm making in the book. I'm not even close to finishing the book yet, so I don't want to sort of pre-make it. But essentially, in doing this, I'm not suggesting that like the group I'm talking about is not every white person who voted for Kamala Harris or anything like that. This is a sort of smaller group that I identify through various markers that I'm talking about. It's maybe 6% of the electorate, 10 or 12% of the white electorate, that kind of sort of meets the criteria I'm really talking about. But I think part of what it is that this is a group with tremendous amounts of power in society. They run the universities, they run our media, they run Hollywood, they have very high positions in government, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a group, and even in the business world, although maybe less there than some other places. So it's a group that their views matter. And again, we don't like to, in a democracy, pretend that, sort of everybody has a vote, everybody matters. But, in reality, some people matter more than others politically, whether that's good or not good. And these are influential people who have very bad and very destructive politics. And it's harmful to them as well. And I mean, you see some of this stuff. I mean, what's going on with this illegal alien right now in El Salvador, who's a wife beater and an MS-13 member and not even an American citizen. And you've got these multiple congressmen, but first this senator, Chris Van Hollen, who's in some ways kind of a prototypical case of this. I mean, he's from this very elite background. Okay. His father was a pretty distinguished diplomat, and I'm sure his family goes way, way back. And just, the kind of level of self-hatred for your society that you have to like turn this into some sort of celebrated cause, it's just disturbing. And again, even if you took a different view of like the due process involved and maybe you didn't think it was good, okay, fine. I mean, I could argue 6 ways from Sunday about why you're wrong, but like, okay, I mean, I can understand like why somebody might not be thrilled about it, but to invest the level of effort that the left is investing in this is kind of the sign of a very disordered political imagination. I just don't know how better to say it than that. So yeah, this is one of the many groups I'm talking about in the book.
Well, you put it very kindly. I was going to say mental disorder, but
I know I do talk about this a lot, right? Because it's actually, and I'm not being flippant when I say this, right? I mean, the percentage of diagnosed mental disorders in these groups is much, much higher, right? Like actual diagnosed medical. And even if you sort of adjust for, well, maybe they're from a type of culture that sort of is more permissive of that. I mean, any way you look at it, these are people, and this is another reason why I'm trying to not be mean and attacking them in the same way I don't try to be mean in the Unprotected Class, my current book, is they're making themselves miserable. They're not just making us miserable. They are making us miserable, and that's why they need to have a stop put to them. But in most cases, they're making themselves miserable, and they're unhappy with themselves. They're unhappy with their own culture. And unfortunately, what they're doing is they're taking that out on the rest of America. So, as a parent, sometimes you have to just give your kids a timeout. And some of these guys just need a timeout, frankly, from politics. And again, I'm just trying to orient that conversation a little bit.
So to go to a drastically different subject, what is the best thing about being Jeremy Carl?
Wow, that is a drastically different subject. I don't know. I've got a great life. I mean, I think one of the reasons, as I said, I live in Montana, so it's nice because I can kind of turn on or turn off this politics thing at will. It doesn't confront me every day when I walk out into the street, all of the dysfunction that I know. I mean, I do travel enough to know that I'm not just imagining it is going on in lots of other parts of America, but in Montana where I live, I don't see a lot of the worst elements of it. So that's great. And I'm happily married. I've got a big family and my health is pretty good. And all the things I don't really have hardly anything to complain about. And I get, thanks to my employer, the Claremont Institute, the ability to write and talk about these sorts of issues without fear or favor every day. And so I wake up every morning and I am excited about the work that I'm doing. And so I know that that's a blessing because not all of us can say that. So that's the nice things about me being me, I guess.
Well, I always like to end my interview. I give the guest the stage. So you can go absolutely anywhere with this. What would you say in closing here to anybody who is tuned in with us?
Well, first, I would just say, buy my book, and not because you're going to make me rich. I sadly make like $4 or something when you out of the 25 or something that I think you'll pay for it on Amazon. So it's not that you're going to line my pockets, but if I've said anything interesting, just getting the message out to read about it is really useful. And I would say the other thing, I'd even say this just as much if you're maybe a little bit skeptical of this thesis that I'm advancing, because I very much didn't just write this book. And I've said this numerous times, this is not just for like super online people or true believers or anything like this. I actually, for some of my younger folks who are often some of the most passionate fans of this book, because if you're a young white guy in particular, you've been feeling this very personally. I said, I didn't necessarily write this for you as much. I wrote this for your parents who might be like, oh, can we say this? I'm not sure. I don't want to read some crazy guy. I don't want to read some racist. You can give this book, and what they'll see is it's a really fair-minded, it's not inflammatory. It's the opposite of inflammatory, at least to the best of my ability to deal with this subject in a non-inflammatory way. And it just lays out its case in a very calm way. And if you go and onto Amazon and you read, there's 170 something reviews of it on Amazon, I think, you'll see the reviewers kind of all say that. So I think I really am trying to write this for the broadest possible audience, because I'm not just trying to pat myself on the back. I want this to be something that people of all different backgrounds can read and appreciate. And I've done interviews about this book with people from every single type of background that you could imagine. I've gotten good book reviews on this book from people from every type of background you could imagine. And so that's been really gratifying, because it was a sort of risky venture from the beginning, but the risk seems to have paid off.
Well, everybody out there, be sure and pick up Jeremy Carl's book and keep your eyes peeled for the next one. Thank you so much for this interview. I've enjoyed speaking to you, and it's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, Paul.
All right, sir. Until next time.
The Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.